of this week's events. Together with fellow organizer Brian O'Donnell, will be moderating this afternoon's talk. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. And if you have questions beyond this afternoon, feel free to email us at the Haddon Township Equity Initiative, and we will certainly provide you with resources as needed. So with gratitude, I welcome Dr. Brent Satterley back again with us to round out a week of amazing Pride events. We've learned the history of Pride, how to be an ally, we've celebrated, we've shared resources and community, and we've all grown together. But now it's time to change directions and take a deeper dive into what can happen when community and acceptance is not available for LGBTQ plus friends and neighbors. As a full professor at Widener University Center for Social Work Education, Brent has helped launch countless students into caring professionally. He's a published author, educator, and clinician with over 25 years of experience. His areas of expertise include human sexuality and social work pedagogies, clinical work with LGBTQIA plus populations, professional identity management, HIV/AIDS, family therapy, and the beloved use of Harry Potter and pop culture in teaching social justice. This week has been one of celebration, but we've not been immune to hate and fear. So we celebrate, but we continue to act, continue to learn, and continue to grow together. Welcome, Brent, and thank you for sharing and continuing to share what folks need to hear. We need to have pride beyond parades. So this afternoon, we're going to be talking about lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and asexual youth and suicide. So Brent, welcome.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I just want to start by saying a huge thank you to Haddon Township Equity Initiative and the town of Haddon Township for the amazing creativity, magic, support, and aspects of the event over the course of the last few days. I can say certainly as an out gay person in this town, as an out and proud gay sissy boy in this town, I have felt that deep in my heart, and it has been amazing. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Pride Beyond Parades, LGBTQIA youth, and suicide. And you might say, well, that's kind of a downer for the end of a series of Pride events. Well, the reality of it is that the world that we live in isn't all rainbows. There's aspects as relate to hate, oppression. People often don't understand necessarily heterosexual or cisgender privilege. You know what cisgender is if you attended or viewed the video that was at the beginning of this Pride event, Pride in Context. And so one of the things I think is particularly important here is to be able to understand how hate and oppression can affect some of the most vulnerable populations in our society today, and that's LGBTQIA youth in our world. So without further ado, let's get started. So why are you here? I've included a brief statement here from Haddon Township, statement on racial justice. And it's specifically about Black Lives Matter. Black history matters because it's our shared American history. Change starts with us. We stand in solidarity with the Black community and declare that Black lives matter. For community to truly thrive in Haddon Township, the voices and experiences of all residents must be respected and honored. We are committed to actively listening, learning, and engaging in important conversations about race in order to ensure a more equitable future for all members of our Haddon Township community. In other words, Haddon Township is a community of care, and that's why you're here today. The reality of it is that the world in which Haddon Township is not immune from hate and oppression. And I think one of the things that's so powerful, I was leaving, just a brief story in that context, I was leaving the LGBTQ Pride pool party yesterday, which was magical and fantastic and amazing. And on my way to my car and was harassed, actually, which was quite a jolt coming from a Pride space. And, you know, right along Crystal Lake Drive. And And just a reminder, and what was concerning was, I wasn't so concerned for me. I can handle that kind of stuff at this point. And yes, it's not good and I shouldn't have to, but I've been an out gay sissy boy my whole life and have dealt with that kind of thing in my world on a regular basis. But one of the things that is so concerning to me is that there were queer youth who were behind me, wearing, a rainbow flag, having their hair, dyed in trans colors, non-binary kids wearing all kind of pride paraphernalia, gay boys holding hands, all that kind of stuff. And what we'll find out here today is that that kind of stuff is poison to youth. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But regardless, why you're here is because you care. Haddon Township cares. And it brings me to the reality of why you're really here. And that is, they're just kids. Kids trying to be themselves, love themselves, have high self-esteem, have great, bright futures as citizens and active members of a thriving and wonderfully robust community of Haddon Township and beyond. And the other reality is that being queer, it's not just 21 plus identity. Children and youth are LGBTQIA, and that's an important part of it. So why you're really here is that you're going to save kids' lives by knowing some of this information. Before we move any further, it's really, really, really important to take a moment and talk a little bit about safety and trigger warnings. I truly believe that no educational experience is ever really safe, because oftentimes education is meant at times to make us uncomfortable, to make us critically think, to make us do reflection. And one of the challenges about some of this work is we have to be able to have conversations in ways that are developmentally appropriate, that are informed, that allow for different kinds of dialogue. Whenever we talk about human sexuality, and certainly trauma of any kind, but including suicide, they're really sensitive topics, and to be aware of those, we have to discuss them with care. I encourage anyone who needs to pause this video or step away if you're feeling distressed, reach out and find folks that care about you, who you could talk to. Please note that this is just a basic point of awareness that is helpful in preventing suicide, and it's not designed as a substitution for good clinical professional help. Please reach out, and here are some great resources: the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, 1-800-273-8255, and definitely the Trevor Projects, Trevor Lifeline, Trevor Talk, Trevor Text. You can start all those kinds of conversations. You can do Trevor Chat. The Trevor Project is an organization that specializes in LGBTQIA youth suicide prevention. So this information will be available throughout the presentation. So some guidelines. Again, we're going to center queer voices that oftentimes, because we're talking specifically about queer experience, we need to center queer voices, which means we're not centering heterosexual voices or cisgender voices. And so if you don't understand something, if you don't experience something the way you think is true, or you think something is a little off, recognize that perhaps your perspective is one that's outside of the context of queer space. It's a different culture, as we'll see. I want you to seek intellectual and cultural humility. Hold your ideas, beliefs, and values lightly. And I don't mean you don't have to cherish them. Of course we cherish our values, but the idea of what it means to have an open mind and to understand some of that. One of my favorite definitions of having an open mind is the time that in the documentary It's Elementary, talking about gay issues in schools. Great documentary, by the way. But there's this little kid and this one woman asked, do you know what open-minded is? And he said, yeah, I know what open-minded is. It's like if you've never had broccoli and you can, you might try it, you might like it. Like, you have to have an open mind. And I thought that was the best definition definition ever. So it's really amazing in that experience. I want you to distinguish between opinion and informed knowledge. Everybody has an opinion. But having informed knowledge means study, critical thinking, reflection, reading, talking to people who are different from you, getting involved in communities that are different from yours, diversifying your circle. Get beyond your comfort zones in that way. Value personal stories and broad group patterns. We absolutely value personal stories. They're really important. Anecdotal evidence is critical for understanding asides. Oftentimes, because of privilege, we know that a lot of those stories don't actually get in the press, published in art expression, et cetera, et cetera. So they're really important, but also value broad sociological group patterns, things that we see like the incidence of hate crimes. We know that when there is progress around social justice movements, be it in social circles, culturally, major legal cases, that hate crimes increase, they spike, because oftentimes some folks who are rejecting punitive, who hold discriminatory attitudes, prejudicial attitudes, often will act out or see it as a threat and then lash out in that. We saw that certainly after Oberfeld, the landmark decision that legalized gay marriage in the United States. So that's really significant and important. Queer culture differs from straight or cis culture. It's a different lived experience. There are different assumptions, cultural norms, cultural scripts, and it's not just one culture. Intersectionality matters fiercely. The reality of it is that being LGBTQIA isn't one race, right? White people are LGBTQIA, Black people are LGBTQIA, Asian people, Latino people, people with disabilities, people of all races, cultures are LGBTQIA plus, and that's really important to note how those things are. People of different socioeconomic statuses, et cetera, immigration status, religions, and whatnot. I'm going to encourage you to be sensitive and respectful in this presentation as you kind of reflect on these things. And that means embracing what's called a trauma-informed approach. We're going to be talking about trauma, and that can be really hard. And recognizing that the CDC has really, in its ACE study, that is adverse childhood experiences, has really revealed that adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are actually in a much higher incidence than we thought previously. This was in 2015. I believe, and it's one of the areas that we've seen a lot more childhood and adolescent trauma than previously noted or thought. And so we recognize what happens to people biophysically, psychologically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, sexually, and often in the experiences. Trauma isn't behavior, it's reaction often, and that people later on in life who have had trauma have different reactions, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. LGBTQIA are a vulnerable and resilient population. Oftentimes we'll paint dire pictures of stats because they're real. Queer trauma is real, as we'll talk more about, but it's not all like terrible, and to think so is to skew the understanding of a resilient population of amazing queer folks who have a lot to offer. But there's a lot of reasons why people sometimes struggle, which we'll talk about. Empathy is a really sophisticated skill set. Empathy is one of the most, I'm a clinician, I'm a therapist, I've been for 25 years, and it is probably, in my opinion, other than building relationship with clients and patients, empathy, trying to put yourself in other people's shoes, perspective taking, right, point of view, is one of the most significant and important things as that process. Handle discussing suicide with care. As we will see a little bit later, suicide is actually contagious psychologically, groupthink-wise. And so whenever you talk about suicide, we have to do so from an informed perspective very carefully. Family matters, friends matter, and community matters. If there is nothing more significant than what happened this last weekend, or this last week, if you will, is the power of community. Seeing 10,000 people come out to little Haddon Township for Queer Pride was just magical and amazing. And I can tell you, as a kid who grew up in a small town, that is changing lives. It would have absolutely changed my life if I had that kind of experience in a small town growing up. Really, family matters, friends matter, community matters, and language matters. The kind of language we use is really critical and important, as we'll talk more about, specifically about respecting others with dignity and worth. And of course, whenever we do a Zoom, experience, I always note the possibility of Zoom bombers. Please be aware that we will be monitoring and watching for those and remove if appropriate. All right, so let's get into the nitty gritty here. Understanding stress as it relates to LGBTQIA+ lives with a specific focus on youth. As I mentioned in the context presentation earlier this last Wednesday, it's the alphabet soup of queerness, and we love the acronym LGBTQIA+, and it's because there's all kinds of different ways that people identify as queer. Queer is a very much umbrella term that can be used to incorporate a whole lot of different types of folks: lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, asexual, etc., pansexual, demisexual. There's all different kinds of terminologies that are beyond the scope of this presentation. I highly encourage you to go to the Haddon Township Equity Initiative Pride pages and check out our resources page that Brian O'Donnell put together, and it's amazing with contributions from folks in the initiative. So check it out. There's all kinds of great information there if you need some more basic information like understanding terminology. So just a brief video, because it's absolutely critical that we actually hear from queer youth themselves. What advice do you have for LGBTQ teens?
You are valid and loved and exactly who you are, whether you're visible or not.
My advice for teens who are thinking about coming out is to do it on your own terms. Don't feel pressure to come out just because you see a lot of people are coming out at younger ages, and that's amazing for them. But if you're not ready to, don't do it.
A really popular misconception is that there's just this one giant coming out experience, but the truth is you're gonna constantly be coming out wherever you go.
I was really horribly depressed in high school, and after I came out, I didn't magically wake up the next morning feeling 100% confident in who I am and everything I can do in the world, but I felt so much better.
While telling your story is incredibly important, maintaining your safety is even more important. If you are in an environment at this present moment that is unsafe for you to come out, it's okay to wait a few years until you are safe.
Whether it's in a new environment such as a school, a workplace, and for me, I've kind of realized that my queerness is so salient to who I am that I have intentionally decided to not enter spaces where coming out would pose a problem. The first thing I do is come out because I want to be my most authentic self in whatever space I'm in.
The frustration is totally understandable, it's real, it can be really painful and put you into a spiral that can be really damaging and difficult to get out of. But knowing that ultimately being a part of the queer community means more than any other label, I think would have really helped me a lot in high school.
And I know a million people every day look at you and say it gets better, and that kind of fake voice, and it's a whole anti-hate campaign. You're like, okay, you're saying it's gonna get better, but is it really gonna get better? And I'm telling you, it got so much better.
But once you feel like you are safe, be unapologetic, be unshameful in your identity and who you are. You will only love yourself more for it. And years down the line, when you realize that you have told your story and you do find joy in who you are, you will thank yourself, you will love who you are, and you won't remember the times that you felt as if you were hiding in the closet.
Rates of depression and anxiety and substance abuse and assault and basically all of the terrible things in the world are higher for queer communities because we've been taught to hate ourselves, and you just gotta learn to love yourself through all the adversity.
So for queer people of color, I think also having to function as students is an especially difficult and daunting task because that's something that, you know, society doesn't warn you about. And kind of coping with these difficult situations is something that I've had a lot of trouble with. And for me, my way of confronting my trauma and the world around me has been through activism.
I think probably the hardest thing for me when I came out in high school was not knowing what label to use. Am I bi? Am I a lesbian? Like, I'm not sure if I still like guys or if I don't, and I really agonized over this decision for a long time because I was like, what if I come out as a lesbian and then I have a crush on a guy later? Like, what happens? And like, are people not gonna let me do that? All of my friends, like most of us are just like, no, we're queer, like whatever. But we all had that experience in high school where we were like so desperately wanted a community to identify with, and so much of that was finding a label that fit.
The coolest part about coming out was having younger people at my high school come up to me and say, I'm queer too, and I didn't tell anyone until just now, and I didn't know there were other queer people in my immediate vicinity, and I was like, yes, oh my God, let's get together.
And knowing that, like, regardless of what your specific identity is within that community, you have an entire new family and group of people who you can talk to and confide in, regardless of if they're bi or pan or whatever. And so trying to find that label, if that's something important to you, absolutely, I implore you to do that. But know that it's not going to entirely change your world and define who you are, and it's okay to be uncertain or to just want to stick within an umbrella or a general term for now. That's totally okay too.
Do what you feel is right for you in the moment. And, you know, we talk about like being closeted, but sometimes you're not in the closet because other people are putting you in. Sometimes you need to be there for a little bit longer, and that's okay.
It's hard to justify yourself constantly, but you don't have to justify yourself to yourself anymore.
Staying safe is not shameful. In fact, it's more courageous to maintain your safety until the time is right.
Okay, welcome to folks who are just joining us. We just finished watching a great video, hearing specifically from LGBTQIA youth, talking about advice that they could have gotten. There are some, there's a link in the chat that for those who didn't see, I will throw it in. Feel free to ask questions. But without further ado, we're gonna get started. Please, again, to get started, please note that we are going to be paying attention to respecting each other in our conversations and moving forward with sharing information. All right, so when talking about LGBTQIA stress, we have to talk about oppression. And oppression isn't just some esoteric, theoretical, heady thing that exists in the world. It's things that happen to people on a micro level that are also connected to, in social work, what we call macro, like micro being really small and macro being really big, which I'll talk about in just a second. Oppression is a shaping force. It changes actually people's brains. Neurobiologically, when people are exposed to traumatic stimulus of some sort, which basically means growing up in a violent home, some kind of traumatic incident like an assault, a robbery, a sexual assault, kind of war experiences, natural disasters, those things can actually have an impact on the neurobiological makeup of your brain. And people have a fight or flight response as a result. If you're confronted with something scary, your brain kind of says, okay, what should I do? Should I run? Should I fight? What have you? And those things, if that is prolonged over a long period of time, that can also have an impact on later trauma-based reactions. People can, however, have later trauma-based reactions from one traumatic episode that is a moment in time. That's not something that's a long-going pattern. So there's different ways for ongoing aspects of it. Which we'll talk more about as well. Oppression is a shaping force, as you'll see, looking at how sociocultural biases privilege, the assumptions that everybody you meet is straight or should be, the assumption that everybody you meet is cisgender or should be, the idea that people's gender is determined by what's between their legs, not what's between their ears. These kinds of patterns of messages and biases end up communicating that queer people are sinful, they're sick, they're perverted, they're a threat to the traditional family, whatever that is. And what happens is it then just justifies violence against LGBTQIA plus people. That I'm right in being violent against LGBTQIA folks. And that's a really, really important thing to distinguish, because that is an ongoing experience that happens not just on a day-to-day basis, it's systemic. Forms of oppression are interlinked. It's one of the reasons why I included Haddon Township's statement on social justice and Black inclusion, at the beginning of this presentation, because queer justice is Black Lives Matter, which is supporting, stopping Asian hate, which is increasing accessibility for people with disabilities. That oppression happens both internally because of the messages people have received throughout their lives, feeling toxic messages that translate into negative self-esteem, negative self-worth, things like that. And what ends up happening here is that then translates into how people show up in relationships. And then you get ongoing input from other areas of your lives, family members, friends, workplace, faith community, and even further out beyond that, things like local laws, zoning policies, local discrimination policies and laws, and then bigger, broader social forces like legal systems, like politics, history, colonization forces, imperialism, educational systems that are twisted to only show one particular perspective, the nature of immigration systems. We have seen how oppression manifests itself from the macro, the big stuff, all the way down to the micro, what's happening in your family system itself, right? So recognizing that systemic experience is real and just doesn't stop. And it's, to quote Audre Lorde, there is no hierarchy of oppressions. One is not more powerful or significant than the other. They manifest themselves in different ways. And that's a really significant component to understand and be aware of. So the Human Rights Campaign in 2012, which is a bit dated, admittedly, did a national survey and asked LGBTQ youth, what was the biggest problem that you face in your life these days? My parents are not accepting of me is 26%. Trouble at school or bullying, 21%. Afraid to be out or open, 18%. Mental health issues, depression, suicidality, 14%, et cetera, et cetera. You can see more traditional adolescent things show up a little bit lower, like dating or confused about sexuality. They asked the same question for non-LGBTQ youth, and these are the answers they got. Trouble with classes, exams or grades at 22%. College or career decisions, 17%. Financial problems, paying for college, getting a job, 14%. Family stress or pressure, 10%. The reality of it is that there is a different world that LGBTQ youth plus experience than non-LGBTQ youth do. It's a different lived experience. And people will say, well, it's so much better now. The reality of it is that it's not. And I'll show you some statistics about that in just a minute. And that brings us again back to trauma. There's a powerful phrase, to be born is trauma, right? Trauma is really an emotional response to a terrible event, as I've already talked about. Long-term efforts and effects can be flashbacks, unpredictable reactivity or emotions, hypersensitivity, relationship strains, stressors, physical symptoms, even nausea, headaches, and worse. And of course, and what we know is that LGBTQIA LGBTQIA folks have higher incidence of trauma. And that, of course, can be child abuse. That can be, physical assault. That can be sexual assault. We know that homophobia, heterosexism, and transgender prejudice actually contribute to higher rates of sexual assault and rape. Because of the idea of, oh yeah, I'll show you you're a woman, or I'll make sure that you like men after this. I mean, those are really awful, awful things, but there's been research to really back that up behind perpetrators who engage in those kinds of traumatic incidents as part of it. And what we know is the psychosocial realities for LGBTQIA plus youth include isolation. Now, thankfully, the internet has broken a lot of that isolation and given people access to certain communities over time, which is really magical. However, it's also opened doors for horrific cyberbullying, which is actually one of the primary reasons why we have seen an increase in suicidality among LGBTQ youth in the last 10 years. Mental health issues, depression, anxiety, addiction, substance abuse, right? When people can drink and drug and not feel something, especially pain or what have you about that, family rejection, societal rejection, getting harassed on the street, the reality of intimate partner violence, struggling with poverty, abuse, suicidality, all those things are very real and affect LGBTQIA youth at a higher level. And of course, there are different generational shifts. The silent generation or World War II plus generation, the boomers, are experiencing aging in transphobic or homophobic environments. Their relationships can be disrespected. Their sexuality can be erased or condemned. The notion of Gen Xers, that's my age, we're having midlife issues, experiencing challenges around careers. We have aging parents coping, and many of us, if you've ever heard of the baby boom, are raising families and raising children, and have to often cope with some of the unique challenges around working with dealing with bullying for children of LGBTQIA families. Millennials and Generation Z often are encountering bullying, significant debt, high levels of suicidality and abuse, as well as tremendous struggles with things like environmental vulnerabilities. I will tell you as a professor, what we know from the pandemic is that people often ended up having to go to school virtually, right? And people are like, well, yeah, sure. Well, we also know that people then are trapped, especially youth who are a vulnerable population who often don't have legal rights, are trapped in their in their world. And one of the biggest challenges in that is how they can escape. And in a pandemic where to leave your house could have been risking your life, it was pretty horrible. And we also know that suicide rates increased, as well as intimate partner violence, child abuse, family violence, all of that increased. And as a social worker, I can tell you our folks in child welfare have been working triple overtime in that reality. So let's understand suicide a little bit with a focus on LGBTQIA youth. Again, some pretty scary statistics, that 39% of queer youth seriously consider attempting suicide in the last 12 months. These are recent data, by the way. 38 to 65% of trans individuals experience suicidal ideation. Suicidal ideation is considering like what people are thinking. People are thinking about suicide. They're thinking about a plan, thinking about a method of doing it, those kinds of things. Or they think maybe is this all there is? I'd be better off if I was dead. My family would be better off if I was dead, those kinds of thought processes. 71% of queer youth talked about feeling sad or hopeless for at least 2 weeks in the past year. That's really significant and really important because it's not just an episode, it's something that's prolonged, or it's not just feeling the blues, right? And so we know that that's really important. 2 in 3 queer youth reported that someone tried to convince them to change their orientation or their gender identity, that for somehow they should not be actually who they are. And I don't know about you, but I'm the expert on me. I know what's going on inside of me, and I respect that queer youth often know that as well. And you might say, well, isn't it awfully young, you know, for like a 9-year-old to know that they're trans or feel that they're not in the right body? Well, the reality of it is, from the research, we know that gender identity typically forms between the ages of 2 and 3. And kids have that awareness at that age about themselves. Youth who have undergone conversion therapy are more than twice as likely to attempt suicide as those who didn't. In other words, the idea of conversion therapy being trying to change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity through a therapist or an ex-gay religious faith community organization, or a minister or a pastor or a priest or an imam or a rabbi or what have you. The idea is that not accepting people for who they are, and that somehow if you just have enough faith, or if you try these kinds of often torture-like therapeutic techniques, which aren't really therapy, they're actually torture, electricity based on stimulus after being exposed to sexual stimulus, things like being put in freezing cold water or really hot water after being exposed to sexual stimulus. These places exist and they happen, and they are not licensed, you know, because all the major mental health organizations, both APAs, American Psychological Association, American Psychiatric Association, the NASW, National Association of Social Workers, the American Counseling Association, the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, et cetera, all condemn, you know, and conversion therapy or reparative therapy as being unethical. And in many states, including New Jersey, I'm proud to say it's illegal. It can be really damaging and actually kill people. 87% of LGBTQ youth said it was important for them to reach out to a crisis intervention organization that focuses on LGBTQ youth. Youth need us. They need access to resources and support. They need that kind of thing as a big part of it. 98% of queer youth said a safe space social networking site for LGBTQ youth would be really valuable to them. Well, we're going to make sure that those are available. Other risk factors statistically, you know, include like for LGBT youth, 50% verbally abused in high school, over 1/4 threatened with violence, 10% physically attacked, 30% fear verbal abuse, 20% fear physical attack, greater than 1/3 made a suicide attempt. 42% of males and 25% of females reported suicidal ideation. And we know that 60% of LGBT youth reported feeling so sad or hopeless that they stopped doing their usual activities. This is a major clinical symptom of depression. And as you'll see in a little bit, depression coupled with discriminatory actions and stigma are the deadly combination here in this experience. 40% considered suicide seriously, 30% tried. 30% tried, and that's very concerning. And trans youth, the stats are even higher. 96% verbally harassed at school, 83% physically harassed, 75% didn't feel safe or dropped out. 46% engaged in sex work for survival, 71% were sexually assaulted, 75% used alcohol and drugs. Trans individuals report much higher, significantly higher suicide attempts than lesbian, gay, or bisexual persons. And this is one of the big challenges about a lot of the research. You'll notice here, there's not a whole lot out there specifically focusing as well on intersex or asexual people. Those are areas of research that need to happen. The Youth Risk Behavior Survey from 2015 to 2019 looked at the research where 34% of LGBT youth students reported being bullied in school. 1 in 10 reported missing school because they were afraid to go to school, and that they were more likely to be a target of hate crimes than other minority groups. And that 40%, get this, 40% of homeless youth are LGBTQ. 40%, and the number one reason is their family weren't safe for them or literally threw them out. This is still real, it still happens. Behavioral indicators that are really important when talking specifically about suicidality and some psychosocial stressors to pay attention to are, is there a plan? Does someone have a plan, and is there discussion of a severity of method? I'm not going to talk about that in great detail simply because it's not safe to do that. But the idea of severity of method is important to consider. If someone suddenly has isolating behaviors or angry outbursts, flashing out, that if there is an expression of helplessness and hopelessness, those two things are really dangerous. If someone feels helpless and hopeless for a prolonged period of time, I often, as a clinician, become alarmed. Significant bouts of depression, self-mutilation, because it's much easier to feel physical pain than emotional pain and mental pain, increased drug and alcohol use, having a sudden sense of peace, which is really concerning because when people start to give away possessions or want to try to clear the air with people, it's really an indicator that a decision has been made. Right? So that's a big part of it. We want to look for combinations of these things and recognize the difference between normal adolescent development and experience and combinations that are clinically concerning. If you are not trained to do this work, don't make those assumptions. Always err on the side of caution and reach out to a professional for help. Or reach out and just, if nothing else, go to the Trevor Project and we'll talk about as ways to get further resources. Don't make assumptions. A suicide attempt is not always a strong predictor of future completed suicide. Sometimes it is a call for attention, a call for help, something that has to do with the experience of not wanting that to be the end, so to speak. We have to be careful not to misrepresent data on suicide attempts that are indicative of higher rates of suicide deaths. Again, two major risk factors: depression and stigma and discrimination. So the harassment on the street, hostility, bullying, family rejection, coupled with depression are the two major factors that demonstrate growing evidence to be concerned about suicidality. But there is hope.
What is the worst incident that has ever happened to you since you've been gay, as far as being gay?
I guess my parents, them finding out was the worst.
When we think about the experiences of sexual and gender minority youth in the United States today, it's really, to some extent, a story of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth are somewhere between 3 and 5 times more likely to report making a suicide attempt compared to their heterosexual peers. We can't just say that we have broader social acceptance, that we have gay characters on TV, and so now suicide disparities are going to go away. These disparities have existed for over 25 years, and they haven't shrunk over those 25 years.
I am not a woman or a man. My gender exists outside of the binary. I don't identify with a gender. I was afraid that my chick friends wouldn't want me to come over, hang out with me anymore.
The higher rate that exists among LGBT people exists because of what we call in research minority stress. Simple forms at school that ask who you are in terms of your gender, and if it only includes boy and girl, it's leaving out youth who may identify not as a boy or a girl. Those experiences all build up to really show or document that increase in risk.
If we're going to address this inequity, we have to begin by understanding what are the tools that we need to do it. We need specialized interventions that would specifically meet the needs of sexual minority youth.
Cottonwood exists in kind of this weird in-between. Jerome has a really diverse community and a very out and proud LGBTQ+ community. Sedona the same way, but generally the climate hasn't been as positive in terms of quote-quote alternative lifestyles.
LGBT settings in general, including gay straight alliances, really build a place of belongingness. And that belongingness translates into greater self-esteem, greater social support, better coping mechanisms.
When I came here seeing that we didn't have something like that for our LGBTQ plus students, a lot of whom really need the support, it was important to me to try to create that for them.
It's just a place where I can go and feel not like gay is this weird thing about me. It's just a thing. Because everyone else there is queer too. Well, almost everyone. Like, you're not the only queer kid in the room. You're a queer kid in the room.
A second wave of coronavirus infections this winter likely will be worse.
Potential need for those measures and school closures to continue until 2022.
The worst is yet ahead of us.
I mean, it's hard as a rural community to shift to a totally digital platform in just a couple of weeks, but they're trying to do things that, you know, are supporting while they can. But the days are blurry. It is the 49th of February, March. I have no idea. So basically, yeah. Blur's Day. So, all right, Ryder, what's been going on in your world?
I'm missing looking into the future and being optimistic about it.
Just because things get postponed doesn't mean that they go away. There's still chapters to the story, even though they're not written the way we want right now.
Okay. So I love that video simply because it provides, you know, some discussion, some real discussion, some real stats, and the importance of connection and what it means to build that connection. Unfortunately, we also know that suicide is a contagion. In fact, that when people talk about suicide, when there is an adolescent suicide in a community, we have to be especially hyper concerned because it will affect individuals who have pre-existing risk factors. So who may live in a household that is not queer affirming, or someone is in the closet and is experiencing great minority stress, as discussed in the video. That queer youth often have higher rates of those risk factors. As we mentioned earlier, isolation, mental health concerns, depression, anxiety, addiction, self-mutilating behaviors, struggling with family or societal rejection, difficulty in school, bullying, all those kinds of things. And that suicide just doesn't pop out of the ground. It doesn't come from nowhere and can occur as clusters. Especially when the method is known and then a victim is idolized. And unfortunately, sometimes things like YouTube and social media that have a tendency to idolize folks who have died by suicide, that's a really important factor, because when victims are idolized, it has a tendency to be then framed as a problem-solving technique. And it's one of the reasons why we have to pay attention to that. So when talking about suicide, specifically with LGBTQIA youth, there are some really important do's and don'ts. This is true for teachers, this is true for parents, family, friends, caregivers, the press, all that kind of stuff, put out through the Gay and Lesbian Alliance of Defamation and Movement Advancement. Do emphasize individual and collective responsibility for supporting the well-being of queer people. That it's both our job and it is our community's jobs and it is our government's jobs. It is our faith community's jobs, our schools' jobs to make our communities safe for LGBTQ people in general, especially youth. Encourage help seeking. That sometimes help seeking is really discouraged. You know, especially, you know, among youth, and that reaching out for help is sometimes thought of as, even in this day and age, as something that's weak people do, or something that you don't necessarily have to do, but somebody else does if you need to. The other challenge is that we're confronting cultural scripts where we don't air our business outside the house kind of stuff. And I understand that, I really do, but not doing so can be deadly. We want to emphasize the availability of supportive resources and provide them. There is no reason why we cannot have these kinds of things, like I have the Trevor Lifeline and the Trevor Text listed here. These kinds of things should be available all over the place. Resources online, resources in person. If you're a teacher, put that stuff in your classrooms. However, you talk about those kinds of things and make them available in public restrooms, in your home, in your place of work, those kinds of things. Emphasize the vital importance of family support and acceptance as a resiliency factor that can help serve as a social support and a buffer for stress. Really, really important is that, again, families matter, communities matter, and that's a big part of this experience. We know from the research that when LGBTQIA youth, even youth who experience trauma, if they have one adult who is kind, loving, and will be there, who's reliable, that they can count on, those kids turn out all right. And emphasize the vital importance of family support and acceptance. It's a crucial part of nurturing the emotional and psychological well-being of queer and questioning youth. Yes. Go figure. I always think of that as dull research, but it's so important. If families are accepting, those youth are usually okay. Don't, when talking about LGBTQIA suicide, discuss details of the suicide death or idolize or turn them or mythologize them or slap the headlines all over or describe the method used. Don't have those conversations. That is an important one because it ends up sensationalizing the experience and it contributes to the contagion phenomena of suicidality. Don't attribute a suicide death to experiences known or believed to have occurred shortly before the person died. The experience of that is really important as we frame understanding. Yes, context is important, but people can be having very, quote, good life on the outside, but we don't know always what's going on in here. And it's important not to attribute that experience to a known specific cause, because again, that contributes to the contagion phenomena. Don't normalize suiciding by presenting it as a logical consequence of this bullying or this rejection, and what happened on often experience. You might say, well, isn't that part of the reality? Well, we need to understand that oppression is systemic, but let's not say suicide is the natural outcome of this. No. We want to create different alternatives for coping that are adaptive, healthy, strengths-based, and resilient. And the most important thing in all that is relationship, connection as a big part of it. We don't want to idolize student suicide victims and create some kind of celebrity aura around them. We've seen that in, famous stars who have died by suicide, and they've got this kind of glow about them. It's tragedy. It's a tragedy, and that's all it is a tragedy. That they were hurting so bad, and they felt that sick, that was the only way they felt like they could stop that, when there are other methods and other means to cope with that kind of stuff. Don't use these kinds of terms that I have listed here. I'm not even going to say them because they can actually be very contributing things to a contagion, a kind of phenomena. And don't say that a specific policy in and of itself will somehow prevent suicide. People who have loved someone who has died by suicide really suffer when they hear that kind of language. And so it's very important, yes, to have policies and laws and regulations, non-discriminatory measures that include and increase diversity, equity, and inclusion at all levels for LGBTQIA youth, especially in families. But let's be aware of the importance of how we talk about these things. Race matters, intersectionality matters, ability matters, gender matters, sexual orientation matters, all of that matters, class matters, religion matters. But we need to know that Black, Indigenous people of color and non-Black, Indigenous people of color who are queer face additional burdens, significant ones. Stereotypes related to racism, homophobia, transgender prejudice, where often queer kids of color face accusations of being a race traitor, of losing some of their kinship networks and their communities at higher rates than white queer kids. They report great pressure with having to, quote, choose between their racial ethnic identity and their sexual orientation or gender identity. and they're much less likely to be involved in queer or social or cultural activities than their white peers. It's one of the reasons why we have to have major kind of focus on centering Black queer voices and Latino queer voices and Asian queer voices as part of the conversation. To not do that is leaving a whole bunch of folks out. So I'm going to highlight, there's a trigger warning here. I'm going to be giving some examples of, people who died by suicide. And so those are important considerations. If you need to take a break, that's fine in this experience. So why do we talk about this? Well, talking this about right in New Jersey, Tyler Clemente, in 2010, was secretly filmed by his roommate, having a sexual encounter with a male student, and that was put on social media. Tyler Clemente was so distressed that he died by suicide, and it was a tragedy. It was a horrific experience, and one where something as seemingly simple as sharing a video on social media was so distressing to him that he felt like he had no other choice. So this is a pretty tragic example. And Seth Walsh, so this was a very young person. Again, please be aware, this is very sensitive material. He started getting teased by the 4th or 5th grade, says Judy Walsh, his mother. By 6th grade, the kids were starting to get mean. By 7th grade, he was afraid to walk home from school because he was afraid he would get harassed. As he was walking by a classroom, a kid yelled out, "Queer," stuff like that. Bullying took every form. It was eye to eye, over the phone, personal, cyberbullying over the internet. The breaking point, came after what they believe was a bullying incident in a local park, September 19th. After the incident, Seth appeared to be acting normally at home. He then showered and asked to borrow a pen from his mother to write. And then he said he was going to play with his dogs in the backyard later. And he died by suicide in the backyard. And this is such a powerful and tragic example. And I think one of the things that was really significant here is, at least for me, this is like a 9-year-old kid, and maybe a little bit older, maybe the 12. I can't remember honestly at the top of my head, but regardless, he was young. He was a kid. And when I teach and train around queer issues in schools, which I often do, I get pushback from often well-meaning people who are like, well, what about these parents? What about the board of education? What about, teachers who don't want to teach or train about, queer issues, that kind of stuff? And what I end up saying is, I appreciate that kind of concern about your values, but he is still dead. And this is really where the rubber hits the road for me as a clinician, as a social worker, as an advocate, and frankly, as a gay person. That if Seth Walsh would have been able to have a pride parade, his life might have been different. He may have been saved, right? If he would have been surrounded by such loving people that we have right here in Haddon Township, that might have been different from him. Community matters, family matters. That kind of stuff really matters. Some other examples in their own words, because these are folks who tried to die by suicide. I got way too close to suicide when I was in the closet. I hated my life. I was tired of lying and of being afraid. One night I found myself feeling suicidal. I thought, nothing can hurt more than this. I realized that this was, I could die anytime. I could only live once. So I chose to come out. It was difficult, but I did it, and the pain stopped. I was breathing again for the first time. This is a 19-year-old. This isn't a 7-year-old we're talking about, right? Get out, find a peer group in the next town over until you're more comfortable with yourself. Find teachers or adults you can talk to and trust. 15-year-old lesbian in rural Iowa. Bobby Griffith, I can't let anyone find out that I'm not straight. It would be so humiliating. My friends would hate me. I just know it. They might even want to beat me up. I guess I'm no good to anyone, not even God. Life is so cruel and unfair. Sometimes I feel like disappearing from the face of the earth. Bobby Griffith wrote a journal. This was part of his journal. before he died by suicide. I really like my community to be more aware of homosexuality because it's a lot more common, than around here than most people realize. I wish my teachers would have used gender-neutral language and made LGBT-friendly literature available to other students. 17-year-old trans youth in Texas. Right? This isn't something that's just focused on Haddon Township, right? This is nationally, this is globally in that phenomenon. Good news is that's a lot of depressing stuff and sad things. There's a lot of reason to be sad. But strengths, much like suicide, are also a contagion. And there are tremendous supports and sources of strength. Family support, positive friends, spirituality, healthy activity, medical access, mentors, mental health, generosity. All these kinds of things are things that the Haddon Township Equity Initiative, in the context of the Pride events, communicated to youth about these aspects. Resources, building mentors, role models, family support, community support. Spirituality was so wonderful to see faith communities at our resources night the other night on Haddon Square. Not one of these things alone will prevent someone from dying by suicide, but a combo will make a huge difference. A combo will make a huge difference. Queer resiliency and courage cannot be understated. Beyond the closet, lying and hiding is exhausting. It's exhausting. Hiding parts of yourself, wear you out. You have to use your energy 24/7 to make sure you pay attention to not disclosing parts of yourself. That's called hyperarousal, walking on eggshells. That's called trauma. And that when people have to hide parts of themselves, they don't have as much energy for other things in their world. And so a big part of it is that people learn from coping with oppression. People grow and develop skill sets to cope with oppression. Queer youth present as emotionally resilient, academically and personally successful if their family and peer networks are affirming of their sexual orientation. I would also posit of their gender identity. Community connection is key. Community connection here helps to undermine oppression. It gives people buffers for against social stress. And truth-telling is a raw, revolutionary magic. Being able to be authentic and real with other people who love and care about you and show that they love and care about you and aren't going anywhere makes all the difference. In some cases, as mentioned earlier, coming out isn't always the best thing. It's not. It's not a safe place to do that. When a person is ready, they may lose some people in their lives. That's just true. We know that from the stats, right? But you gain your integrity. Indeed yourself. You're the person who goes to bed with yourself every single night in your own skin with your head on the pillow. And that is a price beyond rubies. It Gets Better is a campaign from 2011 because there was a lot of publicized suicides in that. And it's a controversial campaign. Some people really love it, some people don't. But the idea was to send a message to LGBTQIA youth that it does get better as people grow older. I've always framed it as it gets better in that often LGBTQ youth end up getting more rights and a sense of empowerment and agency over their own lives. The idea of being able to make decisions about your own lives, but they still have to cope with things like systemic oppression, like classism and homophobia and transgender prejudice, racism, etc. But I like the positive message in the context. So I wanted to also use former President Obama's very short but uplifting message.
Like all of you, I was shocked and saddened by the deaths of several young people who were bullied and taunted for being gay, and who ultimately took their own lives. As a parent of 2 daughters, it breaks my heart. It's something that just shouldn't happen in this country. And we've got to dispel this myth that bullying is just a normal rite of passage, that it's some inevitable part of growing up. It's not. We have an obligation to ensure that our schools are safe for all of our kids. And to every young person out there, you need to know that if you're in trouble, there are caring adults who can help. I don't know what it's like to be picked on for being gay, but I do know what it's like to grow up feeling that sometimes you don't belong. It's tough. And for a lot of kids, the sense of being alone or apart, I know it can just wear on you. And when you're teased or bullied, it can seem like somehow you brought it on yourself for being different or for not fitting in with everybody else. But what I want to say is this: you are not alone. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything to deserve being bullied. And there is a whole world waiting for you, filled with possibilities. There are people out there who love you and care about you just the way you are. And so, if you ever feel like because of bullying, because of what people are saying, that you're getting down on yourself, you've got to make sure to reach out to people you trust. Whether it's your parents, teachers, folks that you know care about you just the way you are, you've got to reach out to them. Don't feel like you're in this by yourself. The other thing you need to know is things will get better. And more than that, with time, you're going to see that your differences are a source of pride and a source of strength. You'll look back on the struggles you faced with compassion and wisdom, and that's not just going to serve you, but it'll help you get involved and make this country a better place. It'll mean that you'll be more likely to help fight discrimination, not just against LGBT Americans, but discrimination in all its forms. It means you'll be more likely to understand personally and deeply why it's so important that as adults we set an example in our own lives and that we treat everybody with respect, that we are able to see the world through other people's eyes and stand in their shoes, that we never lose sight of what binds us together. As a nation, we're founded on the belief that all of us are equal and each of us deserves the freedom to pursue our own version of happiness, to make the most of our talents, to speak our minds, to not fit in, most of all, to be true to ourselves. That's the freedom that enriches all of us. That's what America's all about. And every day, it gets better.
Okay.
Like all.
So that brings me to some resources that I think are really important as we kind of begin to wind down this presentation. The Trevor Project is a wonderful organization that actually started as a result of the 1996 movie Trevor. It was an Academy Award-winning short, 20 minutes. I highly recommend it. You can find it online, Google it. It's just a brief 20-minute plus film about a queer youth and his experience, and a lot of it is it's both humorous and compelling and serious. And so I think they started this wonderful campaign called "I'm Glad I Failed," and I think that's a big part of it. And they provide a whole series of wonderful, wonderful resources for families. And that brings us to next steps. Preventing suicide is an active thing, right? Ignoring it isn't good, and the idea of looking at and assessing youth suicide potential is an important part for clinicians to be involved in. When I say clinicians, I'm talking about professionals, family therapists, child therapists, adolescent therapists, so on and so forth. But also, it's really important for family members to be aware of this because they're around youth or their kids a lot more than professionals. So recognizing some of the various conflicting imperatives here, social support versus isolation. How supported are queer youth in this? What is their degree of future optimism about the world versus a sense of hopelessness? And finally, what level of resilience and coping strategies do they have that are really positive and adaptive versus those that are really poor and destructive? And recognizing that those three factors are really significant in increasing youth resiliency, increasing youth strength and coping in that experience. Having said that, I will say very, very forthrightly is that you cannot 100% stop someone from dying from suicide. And I'm saying that because oftentimes what happens for people who are left behind are struggle with anger, struggle with grief, struggle with confusion, struggle with guilt, lots and lots of feelings. If family members are looking for those for resources for themselves, please reach out to organizations that have those kinds of things. They're really important for survivors of people who die by suicide. So what can we do? How can we reduce the risk? Well, there's lots of ways. Professionals and parents can utilize crisis intervention if there's a serious concern. Begin with developing wonderful conversational relationships with your kids in developmentally and culturally appropriate moments. So it's not a one and done kind of conversation. It's a series of conversations about what's going on in their lives, from everything from social relationships, sexuality, personal struggles, emotions, how they navigate decisions, impulse control, things like drugs and alcohol, sex, sexual decisions, struggle, future ideas. Just get involved with your kids' lives, get to know what's going on with them. And it doesn't have to look like a parent sitting down with an adolescent. It might look like, a chit chat in the car on the way to school for 5 minutes, right? And if crisis intervention is necessary, make it happen, take it. That is very important. And get involved, educate yourself, learn about the behavioral indicators, learn about areas of sources of support and resources that you could give to youth. Please shatter the not my kid myth. My kid is happy, they'll never do, we don't always know what's going on up here. You think you do, you don't. Please shatter the illusion that your child is immune in this experience, or that LGBTQ youth is immune to those kinds of messages. Be aware of social media, in bullying, in school, bullying happens all the time, and talk to your kids. Organizations, administration, CEO support, come on, step up. Make those resources visible, make them present, make them available and accessible in multiple languages, in Braille, in all aspects for accessibility for all LGBTQIA populations or their friends. Teachers, medical professionals, professionals of any kind, line staff folks, administrative staff. It's time to change the bystander role in this. If you see something, do something. When I remember growing up, one of the worst things that I had was when people would call me names in the hallway when I was in high school, when I was in middle school. Teachers clearly saw it. I saw that they saw it. Other people saw that they saw it, and they did nothing. And what it did is it communicated to everybody that was okay, that it was okay, and that I was deserving of that kind of stuff. That gets inside a kid like poison. And so you want to be able to stem those hateful comments, and even if it's just about, we treat all people with respect here, and we don't use that kind of language here, and those kinds of things. Make books, assignments, resources, conversations, classroom discussions, inclusive of queer families of all kinds. Peers, you have the magic in many ways, because the evidence shows that reaching out, that peers listen to other peers significantly. You can't save other people. I want to be clear about that. Adolescents, you can't save other adolescents. It's impossible, right? But you can have a significant influence reaching out to a bullied peer, changing the bystander role, getting concerned adults involved if you need to, all right? So what can we do? Oops, sorry about that. Start over. Great film. So additional resources, I already showed you the Trevor Project, Trans Lifeline, Trans Peer Support, translifeline.org, number there, Q space chat, Q chat space rather, peer-based live LGBTQ youth chat where you can get online and chat with folks right away. You can do that over your phone. And then great information on the Trevor Project around specifically resources for Black LGBTQIA youth mental health guide, things of that nature that are really useful and really helpful for queer Black youth in that experience. Quick line of references, and please know we are better off with you here. Even if you are concerned that you might upset somebody, if you are having a hard time, please reach out for help. Please seek help. We care about you. We're better off with you. Thank you so much for participating and attending today. I really appreciate it. And I'm gonna kind of open it up now for questions. Michelle?
Hi, Brent. Thank you so much for all of that really valuable information. And just to let folks know that all of those resources will be shared on our website so that people can access them anytime they need. In the chat, I've also shared some resources, including the Trevor Project, which will be shared on our website, but also Kaleidoscope is a local organization. So if people need to access resources locally, that's a good place to start. Additionally, I just dropped in there some information about mental health first aid. It's a thing that folks who are not necessarily clinicians can access to be trained so that mental health support is as accessible. Mental health first aid is as accessible as regular first aid so that we all can kind of get up to speed on being supportive community members. Okay, so we have some questions. Let's start with our first one, which is, how do I discourage a reluctant or struggling teen to access the support you describe?
Oh, that is such a good question. I think at some point in development, every teen is reluctant about something, right? And the reality of it is that, again, I think so much of it has to do with relationship. Within the context of loving relationships, parents, caregivers, friends, teachers, faith community leaders, social workers, what have you, coaches, can have tremendous impactful influences on the lives of youth. And if a struggling young person is reluctant to explore, examine, like in a sit-down conversation, sometimes simply making those resources available to them, like giving them websites that, like if you specifically, it could be about some of these things as it relates to suicidality, but it could also just be about like LGBTQIA youth. So a great organization is called scarletteen.org or Answer, and also one called Sex Etc, SEXETC.org. Great organizations that will are more of a kind of a comprehensive sexuality education kind of approach, but they're specifically by teens for teens. That's where the magic is. That's often where teens will listen to other teens about their lived experience. And on those websites, there are lots and lots of great stuff around LGBTQIA plus experiences related to sexuality, related to mental health, related to relationships, related to unplanned pregnancy, related to contraceptive technology, all kinds of stuff. So I am always a fan of accessing those resources first, because youth can explore those things on their own time, in their own private spaces and places. And as long as they also have an opportunity to know that you are a safe person to talk to, and if not you, finding someone in their life that you trust as an adult who is something that's very important too. So there's a whole series of ways to go about doing that. But it can even be in the context of not a sit down one-time conversation, like I want to talk to you about suicide, that kind of stuff, but more so about wanting to know about what's going on in your kid's life and what it means to not be rigid in that experience. And ideally, from a parental point of view, what it might be like to have a series of really, really critical and important short list of rules, like don't drink and drive, like what, and I need to know where you're going, call me if you need a ride, and I want to know what's going on with you emotionally, what have you, I mean, all that kind of stuff where you're having a hard time. A series of short things versus trying to, there's an old saying, is this the hill on which I want to die? My grandmother used to tell me, is cleaning their bedroom really that important? Versus like, I want them to come to me with those discussions. So much of it is just about building trusting, caring, respectful relationships in that experience, what it means to both respect a degree of their privacy. However, you also need to know what's going on in their lives. So there's an important balance there with understanding that experience. And that is one that often parents and their youth, their kids, have to talk about and figure out what's going to work for them. So there's no cookie cutter here, but that's a big part of it.
So it sounds like those supportive relationships will help sort of clearly define privacy versus secrecy.
Yes, excellent. Yes, well said.
Yeah, so privacy is fine, but secrecy is not fine in the context of adolescence. So that's great. So again, it always goes back to relationships, right? So the more supportive the relationships and the more you have them, the better off our kids are going to be.
Excellent. Thank you.
So here's another great question. What is the best way to encourage your school district to provide the supports you describe in this excellent presentation, as well as an LGBTQIA plus positive curriculum?
Great question. So much of that has to, honestly, I will tell you right now that Haddon Township Equity Initiative has done the major lift. Like if we're not talking about Haddon Township, I will say that in Haddon Township, they've done the major lift where it requires a community approach. If a concerned parent has a conversation with a principal and it turns into a screaming match, that's not a good relationship. That's not a way to build collegial and collaborative connection, right? And it might mean that perhaps talking with a community organization like HTEI or a faith community or that is pro LGBTQIA or a local social work agency or school, other school-based youth groups in that experience. And then approaching respectfully the school leadership. I always ask students, or parents, like, how many folks here have ever been to a Board of Education meeting? And so in your local school district, because locally is where it happens. Like we can have these big national conversations, but the stuff that when the rubber really hits the road, it's local. It's local stuff is where it happens. So showing up at those Board of Education meetings, having your voice heard in an informed, respectful, civil manner, and coming with evidence and what I call practice wisdom, are important. Building influence is often about building relationships with people. And I'm not talking about influence as in manipulation. I'm talking about influence about things that are genuine points of influence. So you're not manufacturing influence and coming up with fake news and things like that. You're talking about real things like real statistics, like the death of Seth Walsh, right? You're talking about how to save kids' lives. And when you start connecting with people on those points of influence about saving kids' lives, oftentimes administrators, principals, and teachers will get on board. And I will say culturally, there has been significant ongoing shift in many ways to try to provide more support to LGBTQIA youth in schools. Although we do know very clearly, we cannot keep our heads in the proverbial sand, that there's a lot of resistance to that when former President Trump, banned transgender persons from serving in the military. A number of local representatives at different local House and legislators statewide across the country started introducing what are called bathroom bills, so preventing people from using a restroom in a public school building that would fit with their gender identity as opposed to their biological sex or the sex that they were assigned at birth. And what we saw during that time period is, shocker, LGBTQ youth suicidal ideation increased. Like the Trevor hotline was ringing off the hook. So we saw that kind of stuff, the stuff that happens locally affects kids nationally. So you as a parent, a concerned community citizen, whatever, get involved, and be part of that process. Great question.
And we're lucky in New Jersey, right, that we're one of the most progressive states in the country, and that we have state mandated curriculum changes coming ahead that will be including LGBTQIA plus heroes and just general issues that affect the community. So in New Jersey, that's a state mandate. So we're lucky in that way, but certainly folks across the country are not as lucky as we are.
Sure.
Okay, we have another great question, which is, how do I talk to siblings about their brother or sister who is exploring new gender identity or sexual preference?
Initially, just as FYI, typically we don't use the term sexual preference because that indicates choice, right? Like I prefer chocolate ice cream or vanilla. This is more orientation, a part of someone who someone's attracted to or falls in love with, right? Just a little piece of kind of a teachable moment there. Secondly, though, it's a really, really important point. I often will say, first, reaching out to organizations for, again, I feel like a broken record here, but for support and finding resources. There are lots and lots of organizations that have like PFLAG is a great one to get started with resources, looking at how to talk with family members around these kinds of things, looking at finding out, and the way you have to think developmentally too, the way you would have a conversation like that with a child who's 7 is going to be different from a child who's 17, right? And so you have to kind of think a little bit about that from a developmental point of view, a cultural point of view in that context. And I also think it's important that people's values play a role in those discussions. What's important to you and your family in terms of that context, but thinking about it from understanding that where you may have to talk specifically about certain language that's used in your household or not, and I guess it depends on the approach. The other part of it is, though, is simply providing developmentally appropriate material to your children, be it 7 or 17, is going to help with people understanding it. Thankfully, for so many, for Generation Z, for example, they're like LGBTQ stuff is just like, oh yeah, that's just my friend so and so, right? And it's not as big as it perhaps was for folks like myself growing up, or my father or my mother, that kind of stuff in that experience. Doesn't mean it's not still a significant issue. Let me be clear. You saw the stats, right? And that's really, really important. But I do think it's important to tap into generational strengths that Gen Z and millennial folks have that perhaps older generations struggled with as part of those open and honest conversations. I also think, again, it comes back to building relationships. Siblings are such an important and valuable part of an individual's life when it comes to people who are around, people who are present, people who can be supportive, because you have a shared history, right? A share, in that experience, and what that's like can build connection. And the reality of it is there's a phenomena coined by Frommer called the outsider syndrome, and that's basically where if a black child goes to school and comes home to their black family, they experience racism at school, they can talk about it with their black family and kind of get support, maybe even sadly having to teach about how to navigate white supremacy and racism and things like that. A queer kid goes to school and gets bullied or beat up or something because they're queer, be it trans, non-binary, effeminate, gay, what have you, comes home to a straight or cisgender family, and doesn't have anybody to talk to. And that's a sense of isolation, right? And so what they do is they will often seek out, people online. And sometimes that can be great, sometimes it can be not so great. And so you want to be able to be a person who breaks that outsider syndrome for your LGBTQ youth children and educate your other children around that experience. So lots of options there.
Well, that's great. So it sounds like for adults who are listening and watching this, it's really important for them to kind of like tighten up their own ship and make sure that they're just that teachable moment there, saying preference.
Right.
That it's important to kind of be mindful of your own language so that you're communicating this over time. Like these conversations may have happened coming from a good place, but you're using language that suggests a level of flexibility about something that really doesn't exist for your child.
Right. And a great example of something seemingly simple is simply saying, oh, that's so gay. Usually the intonation in that is that's so icky, that's so gross, that's so weird, it's so bad. And you might think that's not a big deal. It is a big deal. Because it's those little drips, think of them as little like drops of poison and that continually get dropped into someone's spirit, someone's mental experience, someone's belief about themselves and how you think about them. Those are little data fragments that queer people do not miss.
Mm-hmm. And it seems especially important as, in adolescence when there's a lot of exploration.
Totally.
That we're, when they're getting messages of, these sort of like, they're not really undercover messages, but when the language is used is not, people are not as conscious of the language that they're using. It's, people are hurting people unintentionally. So it's really important for people to be aware.
Yep.
And continue to learn, which is what we're trying to do. And we're all going to make mistakes and that's okay, but just to reflect and try to refine.
Yeah, totally. I love it.
So we have someone asking, can we consider having webinars like this for 10 to 12-year-olds, 13 to 14-year-olds, and 15 plus?
You mean targeted towards those populations?
Yes.
Sure. I think there are wonderful opportunities to be able to provide webinar services for queer youth specifically. There are already great stuff out there, like the stuff that I just pulled up as in researching for this presentation. A lot of it I've used, but I wanted to update some of things, like some of the videos. And there's some amazing stuff that's already out there that we can highlight and provide so folks have access to those kinds of resources on a regular basis.
I think that's a great idea. And the more that people talk about these kinds of issues, the easier it's going to become. Like,
right.
A question that I often hear is that people are afraid to talk about suicide because they think it's going to increase the chances of somebody making that attempt.
Right.
And it's okay to say to somebody, are you suicidal? That's not going to plant the seed in their mind. And what you're doing is opening a door for a discussion. Believe
me, people have already thought about it. It's like it's kind of like basic sex ed 101. Like people have already thought about sex. You don't have to talk about it. They've already thought about it, or things. And the reality of it is that there's lots of different ways that you can ask if someone is struggling with suicide. Have you thought about hurting yourself? Do you feel like you're safe? And you don't, but if you are very concerned, I do think being very clear and direct, are you thinking about suicide? Are you suicidal? And figuring out that's a great way to say, I want you to be safe. I love you and I will listen to you and I will do what we need to do to make sure you're safe.
Fantastic. We have a question about, I think this question is related to more of a general understanding of sort of the spectrum of sexuality. So a person's asking about polyamory, and is that a part of queer culture?
I got it. Polyamory is actually one of the things that we could frame as a lifestyle, like monogamy is a lifestyle. And although there are some folks who have said polyamory is an orientation, for the purposes of this conversation, I'm framing it as a lifestyle in the kind of a lot because of how people choose to build relationships in their lives. We know that traditional monogamy is practiced by 1% of the species, whereas most of the time in the United States anyway, we frame like monogamy, we frame it as actually a serial monogamy is what's often practiced in that one person is with one person and then ends a relationship and then moves on to be with another person, they're only with that one person, etc. So much of it is also dependent upon how you define those things beyond the scope of this conversation. Yes. I would encourage you to explore lovemore.org. There's an organization called Loving More, and to learn more about specifically polyamory. There's a great resource, please don't let the title throw you. It's called The Ethical Slut by Dossie Easton. And it's a wonderful, magical, short text that talks about things like polyamory. Whether or not it's more prominent in the queer community is hard to say. I will say that, again, as I mentioned, that queer culture is not straight or cis culture. Often people don't have a tendency to assume monogamy as much as other folks who might identify as straight do in the experience of how people construct and arrange their lives, often because queer people have to be intentional about how they arrange their lives because they've had to, about things like, because gender sexism often has said, okay, women do this and men do this in relationships, right? And when a man and a woman are in relationship, they kind of have to figure out how they're going to do some things. And that's a really important part of gender expression and an important part of what people feel like they want to do because they like to do it. I really like to clean. I do not like to cook. I'm so glad I married a man who loves to cook, right? And but the reality here is that polyamory is simply something that is a way that people arrange their lives. It officially means, it actually means many loves, where they build relationships within the context of agreed upon consensual ethical adult agreements in the context of those relationships. If you want to learn more about that, please check out lovemore.org or look at some of those resources.
So what that question says to me is a lot of people have questions about sexuality.
Yes.
And whatever their questions are, their curiosities, there are ways to get that information, certainly, and in safe spaces so that you can kind of explore, especially for our youth, that they can explore and sort of figure out where they land and feel comfortable with that. So tying this back to the theme of this is that the more that we talk about this in safe spaces, the less shame people will experience, and the less shame, the less isolation. We are, certainly going to affect the suicidality, the experiences of suicidality and the rates of suicide amongst our youth. So
and
the more we talk, the better off we're going to be.
Absolutely. And I think the point being is that even if you're on, like, oftentimes adolescents want to have those conversations with trusted, loving adults, but often trusted, loving adults send off such discomfort-oriented meta messages that awkwardness, discomfort, I don't want to talk about it kind of thing, because parents and caregivers often don't know how to talk about it. So if you're a parent and caregiver who doesn't know how to talk about it, find out how to talk about it, educate yourself, and learn some new skills. And I can tell you that other people are already having conversations with your youth and your kids about sex and sexuality in all its forms, about drugs and alcohol, about all that kind of stuff, basic kind of sexuality questions. How do you know when you're ready to have sex? Those kinds of things. So have those discussions. And when you have those kinds of discussions, then you can also have other types of discussions, especially around emotional mental health, like this, that directly affects the possibility of saving lives. And I think, Michelle, you framed it really, really well. We should take this gig on a road.
Well, Brent, that was our final question. I just appreciate you so much, and I appreciate the information that you have to share with our community. And I hope that, we can continue to have these discussions so that Haddon Township and beyond can access information and continue to support our community members and our youth so that, mental health and just happiness in general is something that we can support as friends and neighbors.
Yeah, for sure. And the reality of it is that like the title of this particular presentation was Pride Beyond Parades. Like Pride doesn't stop because like July comes, right? And it's really important that we continue to kind of celebrate and provide resources. And, as it's often said, we've only just begun, right? Come on, let's do this. So thanks so much for having me. It's a real privilege. And please know, I'm happy to chat. Feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is right there. I'm happy to do that. So without further ado, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thanks. Okay. And I'm gonna